Hi, everybody. I'm Jesse Eisinger. I'm a senior editor and reporter at ProPublica and a regular at Stigler. I guess it's 8 years, and I'm thinking of this version as well. It was fun while it lasted. Um, but Antitrust now can be consigned to the annals of history, perhaps. But today we are going to be talking all things Elon Musk. And my friend Julia Angwin, who will be moderating later, there she is, said that the first Trump administration was a DDoS attack on our psyches. That the Bannon line was a little less technical. Flood the zone with shit. I don't think that any one human being can assimilate all that's gone on with the Trump administration and all that they've done and the various attacks on democracy and waves of corruption. But even this subset of the topic of Musk is also similarly a DDoS attack on the psyche. The amount of material that you have to assimilate to understand what Musk is doing and what his importance is in the American economy, American society, and the administration is too much for one person. But fortunately, we have three experts who can attempt to start to surround this topic. And just a kind of quick summary. Of course, there's Doge. It's almost impossible to figure out what Doge is doing in its entirety. But it's obviously an extraordinary new development in modern American political life. There's Musk's government contracts, which are in some ways the lifeblood of the entities that make up the bulk of his wealth. If what we just ran a story on SpaceX a few weeks ago, and it was surprising to me that the plurality of Musk's wealth actually comes from SpaceX, not from Tesla. Tesla is a smaller portion of his wealth now than SpaceX. SpaceX is private. Nobody really knows what the finances are. But of course, it's got government contracts, Starlink. Tesla has government contracts around the world. And then there, of course, is business fortunes. The stock is sliding. Sales in Germany are cratering. BYD in China is an extraordinarily potent competitor. And then there is politics, flirting with eugenics, flirting with openly supporting the AfD, far-right party in Germany. Obviously, he bankrolled Trump to the tune of over $250 million, but then more recently he tried to intervene and threw a huge amount of money into the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, which he said was held the fate of humanity in its hands. And unfortunately for humanity, the candidate that Musk supported lost. So we're doomed, I guess. So we're going to talk about this. He's a singular figure. I can't come up with a figure like Musk in American history. Maybe the panelists can. I think he's a kind of combination of Andrew Mellon and William Randolph Hearst, maybe some Rockefeller combination, who has had this kind of influence. So the first I want to talk, have Guy go to you, and I want to ask you sort of what kind of figure is Musk, what kind of problem he is. I think the consensus of the panel will be that he's a problem, a significant problem for American society and democracy? Maybe there's an intrepid Chicago school professor who will defend Musk in the Q&A. You're welcome to it. Or Matt Stoller, who likes to just be contrarian. Maybe he'll. I doubt he would. But so what are we dealing with here, Guy?
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Before we start, I want to start with a very famous quote of Carl Sagan, the intellectual that wrote it in 1985. I'm sure many of you have come to see this quote again in the last couple of years. It's all over the internet. So in his 1995 book, The Demon Hunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, he wrote, I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the key manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness. So this is 40 years ago, and it feels not only that it's one of the most prescient warning we ever had, but maybe also a roadmap to our current crisis marked by social media manipulation, disinformation, algorithmic amplification, and populist backlash. Now, back to a question, Jesse, the Elon dilemma. So, first of all, the Elon question is part of a bigger challenge facing Western democracies. It's how we deal with the epistemic crisis, the breakdown of our knowledge structure. And I think that the best place to start is in the end of 2022, when Elon announces that he bought Twitter to defend and protect and promote absolute free speech. And of course, everybody loves free speech. And people like Musk and all the platform defenders invoke First Amendment, of course, as the bedrock of our democracy and everything that we cherish and admire. And this framing is, of course, both false and manipulative. And Elon, I think, is the most talented storyteller of those ideas. At least he was until recently. So when social media companies like X claim that they are absolute free speech or neutral platforms that are upholding the freedom of expression, of course, what they do is they obscure the fact that the active role that they play in shaping the discourse. Their algorithm are not neutral pipes. That was, by the way, they're designed 15 years ago. We might talk about that. And they now amplify some voices over others based on the engagement metrics, favoring the outrage and misinformation, polarization, because those drive clicks and profits. And of course, all of it is based on surveillance. This is not an open marketplace of ideas and far from a market for quality information. It's a manipulated arena engineered to reward emotional extremity and not any deliberative reason. This is not liberty, it's disguised power. And the freedom of speech today belongs to mostly to Musk and to Bezos and to Zuckerberg and to Sergey and Larry and the Communist Party of China, of course. And free speech, as we heard from Paul Starr, Professor Starr, as well know, can be interpreted in two ways: the negative and the positive. Now, negative liberty, in Isaiah Berlin's term, is freedom from interference. It's the absence of constraints. This is the form of liberty often invoked by Elon Musk, the notion that users should be free to say whatever they want without censorship, and Musk can amplify or censor whatever they want. But negative liberty, as we know, can empower the strong at the expense of the weak. On unregulated platforms, the absence of constraint does not create a level of playing field. It amplifies the voices that have more time, more resources, more bots, we're going to talk about it, and more willingness to engage in lies, in misinformation and disinformation. Now, in this ecosystem, those with the loudest megaphones drown out everyone else. And the result is no freedom of speech. Now, positive liberty, on the other hand, is the freedom to act, freedom to participate meaningfully in public discourse, to deliberate, and to shape one's own destiny. Now, that requires not just the absence of constraints, but the presence of the enabling conditions, access, literacy, protection from harassment, and most importantly today, assurance that no one's voice will be algorithmically buried or violently shouted down. Now, social media platforms that allow mobs, propaganda networks, what it's called, we're going to talk about it, coordinated inauthentic behavior and harassment campaigns to dominate, those are not promoting free speech. They are destroying the very conditions that make speech free for most people and deny citizens the right for liberty to be informed. And we know who are the people that are most adept at using those algorithms. We know who have the resources. This is an investigative piece from the New York Times from a year and a half ago. One of the biggest political campaigns, propaganda campaigns, that they trace it to China and Iran and Russia. Now, the rhetorical manipulation is the key weapon of people like Elon to prevent laws and regulation or any accountability. So they argue, of course, that any attempt to constrain them is or to demand transparency is a form of censorship. But this is, of course, a sleight of hand. A society that values democratic deliberation must protect speech not only from state repression, but from private systems of control that distort, suppress, or corrode public reason. And the real danger is not from removing Nazis, bots, or people who incite violence. It's from allowing people like Elon and opaque machines to determine who speaks and who is silenced. And if we care about freedom of expression, we must embrace a democratic conception of it. One that asks not just who gets to speak, but who gets to be heard, who gets to be protected, who gets to shape the conversation. And that is the difference between society of speech and a society of noise. Now, what did Elon do when he took over Twitter? He fired the teams that were trying to weed out hate, Nazis, and coordinated inauthentic behavior campaigns, like those of China and Russia and so on. And he installed a new and improved algorithm. And this is the new and improved algorithm of Elon Musk. There is an anecdote that was revealed by Bloomberg at some point that Elon really got mad with his own algorithm when after the Super Bowl, he tweeted and Joe Biden tweeted, and Joe Biden got more likes. So he called all the engineers quick to the office, and we need to fix the algorithm. Now, it's after the first panel, we discussed the media of yesteryear. Now, it's important to remember that the news media of yesteryear also did that, okay? The oligarchs, the media moguls, of course, but there are two big differences. The first one is the numbers. Platforms are now an order or three orders bigger, okay, than the Rupert Murdochs of the world. We're talking about hundreds of millions of users or billions of users. And the second one is more important. Major news outlets had, and some of them still have, not all of them, legal, economical, ethical, and reputational incentives not to engage in lies and misinformation. Platforms' incentives don't have it. They just need addictive content. And we know what kind of content is addictive. So going back to what you said about antitrust, Jesse, in this room we discussed antitrust for the past 7 years, and some of the people who reshaped antitrust participated in your room, and they were some of the people who were first to talk about the threat of political power of big tech. But Elon is not really the classic monopolist. Maybe SpaceX and Starlink are now becoming monopolists because they are sanctioned by government contracts. But Tesla is not a monopoly. And actually, its small share in the EV market is only shrinking. And perhaps Elon understood 3 years ago that he lost his competitive edge with China and Europe manufacturers. And this is why he got into media, politics, and power, so he can shape the rules. This is an investigative piece from the New York Times. And Elon has relationship with all the leaders of those countries, okay? He suppresses voices for them. He censors stuff for them. He elevates their tweets and so over. And also he has huge business interest in all those countries. And of course, Tesla today, when it's losing so much market share, is becoming more and more fragile. So we are worried with Elon, not because he's a monopolist, but because he controls X. Now, except for people like Barry here that we'll hear soon, not a lot of people in DC will worried about Elon buying X. Most of the people in the news media, by the way, were, Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong, were thrilled and excited when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. Now, this is interesting because as my friend Luigi Zingales here likes to say, big business always needs the government. So if big business controls the press, then government controls the press. Now, Bezos told us 8 years ago, right after Trump got into the White House in the first time, that democracy dies in darkness. But in 2023, when the FTC filed a lawsuit against Amazon with potential remedies of breakup, Bezos stopped fearing darkness and became fearful of the light, or what is in plain sight, regulation. So first he replaced the leadership of the Washington Post, and then he basically told them they should learn to appreciate more his ideas about how we should organize society. Now, the Post is still a great newspaper with great journalists, but people understand their boundaries. And I know these are small fonts, so I'll read you a couple of fonts, because the best way to understand the relationship between platform owners and business people is actually, believe it or not, I think that the expert here is Donald Trump. So I'd like to read to you two tweets of Trump. Here is the first one. The Washington Post loses money, a deduction, and gives owner Jeff Bezos power to screw public, on how low taxation of Amazon, big tax shelter. So this is basically Donald Trump explaining to us that the Washington Post is actually a political machine to protect the business of Amazon. And of course, later we saw Jeff Bezos with the rest of the people in the rotunda, while the rest of the people are out in the cold in the inauguration day. Another quote from our president is, "If Amazon ever had to pay fair taxes, its stock would crash and it would crumble like a paper bag. The Washington Post scam is saving it." You got to give him that he knows how to tweet, and he's very precise. So what should we... and by the way, another fantastic quote, I think, that summarized the portfolio of, a lot of people look at Tesla, they look at Starlink, they look at SpaceX, they look at Neuralink, but there is one analyst, a media, political, and business analyst, that was able to explain the entire portfolio of Elon Musk in one tweet. And this is, of course, the president again. Let me read it to you. sorry, when Elon Musk came to the White House asking me for help on all of his many subsidized projects, whether it's electric cars that don't drive long enough, driverless cars that crash, or rocket ship to nowhere, without which subsidies he'd be worthless, and telling me how he was a big Trump fan and Republican, I could have said, drop to your knees and beg, and he would have done it. So Trump understands the business model of the Elon Musk empire. So what should we do now? We want you to go to policies, or let's move
go to the other panelists, and then we can come back sort of for solutions on this. And I forgot to say, please identify any conflicts of interest, which is not that you hate Musk, but you know, financial, I think, is what I'm told. So Barry, Guy stepped on my question, which I'm very annoyed about as the moderator. That's all I get to do here. Is Musk a challenge to the antitrust framework that a lot of people adopted? You know, we're at an antitrust and corporate concentration conference here, and Musk seems like not that kind of problem. And you guys you were very early in identifying corporate concentration as a font or source of political power, and that we should restore antitrust to its roots out of concern for the sort of Brandeisian concern for political power, but that's not the way it's really been talked about and discussed. And when Musk took over Twitter, there really wouldn't have been, as far as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, really any kind of antitrust law that would have helped or would have convinced a judge to block that deal, although you called for it. So what kind of problem is Musk in the framework of antitrust?
So great question. Well, first, I just want to thank the folks who are putting on this conversation at such a difficult moment. This is it's a challenging time to put on conferences like this at universities in public, and not just because of people dropping out, like Commissioner Breton, but just it shows. I recognize the hosts for really doing a great job of putting this together at this moment. The conflicts, our business model at open markets has basically been to take the money from dead monopolists and use it to to fight live monopolists. So that's so I don't think we really have any conflicts. Before I get to your question, I do want to sort of note one area where I have a strong agreement with Elon Musk, and that is on the intellectual capabilities of Peter Navarro, who I have known since 2002. To get to your question of is Elon Musk antitrust problem? Well, first, like a sort of a framework I think might help. Right now, and this kind of feeds off the last guy's initial comments and then the last panel, especially Alexandra's comments. We do face today the gravest threat to democracy in the United States and in Europe, but especially in the United States, perhaps ever, or certainly since the Civil War. And so we have to recognize that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And it is what makes it is this concentration of oligarch power and state power. It's the blending together of oligarch power and state power that creates the threat. This is also the greatest opportunity. This is a gift for those of us who have been fighting this fight for as long as we have. This is a gift because this is being put in front of us by people who are not really that competent yet to create the kind of autocracy that we fear. So it's like they have shown us where they want to go. They have shown us how they want to get there. And yet they, at this point, they don't have the ability to really, put together the most, minimally coherent trade policy, for instance. So embrace this opportunity. This is the opportunity of our lifetimes here in America, not just as a Democratic Party, but actually all liberal Democrats. And we have many, many, many friends inside the Trump administration. We have many friends among Republicans across the state AGs system, across the United States. We have some friends in MAGA, a lot of friends in MAGA actually. So, but we also have all the rest of the American people who, for 250 years, have fought off previous threats to our democracy, time and again, and who have no intention of actually allowing this kind of concentration of power to take place. So, to all of the elite technocrats, Ivy League schooled people, stop with the panic. Speak out.
Okay.
Tim Snyder, good riddance. Let him run.
Excellent. Okay. Well, can I? We'll follow up on that. But I think that there's what I want to bring out here, and I'll go to Audrey first. Is I think that if I understood you correctly, Guy essentially says the problem and Musk's power and the problem comes from his control over the media, over information, and you are arguing you want to follow up. You didn't finish your point.
Yeah. Actually, just real quick on your.
Yeah.
It's like Musk. The people in this room have all kinds of tools to use against Musk. So you just sharpen those swords now. Learn how to do it now. We just heard in the last panel all of this fantastic set of history that we have, all of these laws that we have. This is what the Europeans are doing. It's like Margaret Vestager, the speech that we hosted. I asked her, I said, go back and read the founding documents of the European Commission. And she did. She went back and she gave a speech that took us back to 1948, 1949, 1950. The coal and steel agreement was an anti-monopoly agreement. That was the foundations of Europe. Margaret Vestager didn't know that until last summer. It's like here in this room, we have all of this wisdom. And rather than getting sort of, panicky, let's go back and figure out how to use all these tools. Last 4 years in this country, well, we didn't really pass any laws. We spent a lot of time trying to pass laws. But you know what we did through the guidelines that were passed? We discovered, we uncovered, we dug up the Sherman Antitrust Act, which had been buried under the ground. We dug up the Clayton Antitrust Act, which had been buried under the ground. We dug up the Robinson-Patman Antitrust law, which was under the ground. So keep digging, bring the swords out, sharpen them up, get the rust off them, because it's like this is not just an antitrust, but it's actually a whole of government approach. And this is the thing about what we started off earlier, antitrust. Yeah, antitrust as we perceive it as something that started in 1890, it's very limited. It is. There's a lot of limits to it, and the processes are, they take a long time. But if we actually look at government as a whole, if we understand political economy as competition policy, if we understand competition policy as political economy, competition policy is political economy. It's how we shape competition among individuals and corporations in society. So as we are sweeping the economist out of this room,
Don't get too hopeful.
sweeping the economists out of this room,
Yeah.
we find just an absolute treasure chest of tools that go back 400 plus years that we can use to solve these problems and seize this most fantastic of opportunities, which is to reestablish a true foundation of democracy for the next century.
Okay, so here I think I detect a disagreement here because I think, Guy, you're arguing Musk is like Zuckerberg, is like TikTok, and the threat is over the media and information. And I think, Barry, you're arguing Musk is like Timothy Mellon or Uline or Bloomberg, and the power comes from their money and their oligarchic position. And on the power question, I want to turn to you because I think the relationship with China raises a question in my mind of whether Musk actually is that as powerful as we might think. And the reason I think that is there are two reasons. One is that he's got an enormous number of business interests in China, and China has exerts an enormous amount of control over who does business in China. So who really holds the power there? And then the second thing is when you look at this administration, if it were in the pocket of Musk, would the Trump administration have this belligerence to China and be waging the kind of trade war that it's waging? In fact, Musk just recently said that he would like, no tariffs with Europe, which is sort of the kind of traditional industrialist. So can you explain to us a little bit about how China wields influence over the industrialists, over American businesses, over the global economy, how that relationship works? And then I think that would illuminate really this, what I'm thinking of as the Khodorovsky question, which is Musk less powerful than Trump? Is he the Khodorovsky to Putin here, or is he really the kind of puppet master, and Trump is merely the kind of ceremonial guy who tweets and signs with his big Sharpie?
Thanks, Jesse. And I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. I'm salaried by the University of Southern California and American Enterprise Institute. So I guess in terms of thinking about, Musk as a potential channel of influence to China, I mean, I think if you look sort of, empirically at the data, right, he's very exposed. He has a lot of dependence, and a lot of his, I know Tesla is only a small portion of his wealth, but a lot of Tesla's sort of revenue and profits, right, are driven by the ability to operate in China, right, and has benefited from a lot of preferential government policies that are very rarely offered to foreign companies, right? And so, I mean, Tesla, just as a background, right, has a gigafactory in Shanghai, right, that's a manufacturing facility for Tesla vehicles. And in February of this year, so just a couple of months ago, he just opened a battery storage factory also in China, right? And so he has benefited from exemptions from purchase taxes, from preferential loans from Chinese state-owned banks. Tesla was on the Chinese government's whitelist of firms that, had less strict COVID restrictions, right? And so, while President Xi Jinping had a very draconian zero COVID policy, right, Tesla was one of the very few firms that were allowed to operate more normally. And so, China's Tesla's second largest market. China is key, right, for Tesla's global production capacity. It accounts for over half of Tesla's global output. A lot of the vehicles, right, exported from Shanghai. China accounts for 37% of global sales of Tesla and a lot of its profits. And at the same time, right, in addition to sort of these preferential government treatment that Musk is having, and sort of the close relationships that he's cultivated with the then Shanghai mayor, now the premier of the People's Republic of China, right, Tesla is very reliant on Chinese suppliers for battery components, for the car components, for critical minerals, where 40% of the battery components come from China, including sort of dependence on Chinese refiners for lithium, for cobalt, for nickel. So sort of this is someone whose business is sort of really dependent, I think, on the continued goodwill of the Chinese government. But that's not to say that China always rolls out the red carpet for Musk and Tesla. I think we've seen some examples of potential leverage that the Chinese government has over Musk, where we see sort of not just carrots involved, where actually sort of one side point is that there's been some, I think, censorship of public complaints about sort of Tesla performance and safety in China. And Tesla's actually won the overwhelming majority of cases in Chinese courts that are brought by these consumers, and that I think certainly indicates a strong level of state support for Tesla, right? But at the same time, we see reports that Musk is encountering regulatory obstacles for Tesla and rolling out full self-driving software. And that's reportedly been delayed because of, China wants to use it as potential bargaining chip, right, in U.S. trade negotiations. Tesla has faced difficulties in expanding its production facilities due to PS3 government concerns over Starlink, right? Chinese government disapproved of, Starlink being rolled out in Ukraine. And wanted Musk to assure them that they wouldn't use Starlink in China. Putin requested Musk not to use Starlink in Taiwan. And when the Chinese government expressed concerns, right, of data security and espionage, right, Musk responded by opening a data center in China to localize data from Tesla cars produced in China, right? So we see sort of some tendency to bow to CCP interests. And certainly in Musk's sort of public statements, right, we see a lot of exaggerated praise for China's leaders, sort of really praising Chinese technological and economic development, right, being a leader in renewables and EVs, praising the Chinese government as very responsive to the people, more so than in the United States, even though it's a single-party system. Saying that Taiwan's an integral part of China, that there are two sides to China's repression of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. He sort of, stated that he's kind of, quote unquote, kind of pro-China. And so, given sort of what we was talking about, where Musk, both is involved politically, right, in the Trump administration and has, algorithmic control, through X or Twitter, right? I think this is definitely sort of he can be a very powerful amplifier for Chinese government propaganda and talking points. But sort of in response to the second part of your question, right, which is sort of Musk doesn't seem to have had much influence, right, on Trump's tariff policies, and certainly sort of the focus on China that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. I think I think Musk expended a lot of his political capital on Doge, and so I think actually he, for some reason, right, hasn't been that sort of active in advocating for some of these policies of trying to moderate Trump's policies on China. And I think one way that he could have influence is maybe, I think Trump, cares a lot about tariffs. He cares a lot about the bilateral deficit, right? And that's sort of his very simplistic understanding of, international economics and the relationship with China. And so I think, maybe Musk, going forward, right, could be a potential sort of behind the scenes negotiator, right, where we're sort of saying, oh, look, China can offer, we can offer some more investments in the United States, we can make this deal happen, right? Because I think Trump and Xi Jinping do want some sort of deal, right? This tariff situation isn't sustainable. And so, I think there is still a potential path for him to sort of be the bridge, sort of trying to close the deal and offer these additional incentives. But I think Trump cares too much about the deficit, right? And it's really sort of focused on tariffs, whether as an end game or as a bargaining tool, right, to get Chinese leaders to come to the negotiating table. That I think Musk hasn't really been, as you said, that influential on tariff policies. But yeah.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see if he shifts his attention, and whether, it'll be a big test of his power coming up. So, Guy, I want to go back to you because I want to put a proposition to you that the problem with Musk is not his money, his oligarchic money, and it's not this control over the information platform, but the fact that it's his ideology. and his politics, and that he is, a far right sympathizer, with maybe he throws Nazi salutes. Who knows? He's a kind of troll and groiper, and so who knows if he's sort of joking around. But if he were running Twitter in a kind of way to make money and to be efficient, would Twitter be a problem? And so, the question I have is it because he's he wants to amplify the voices that he wants to amplify rather than the fact that he can amplify them?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say something about Musk ideology. So if you look at Musk tweets over the last 15 years or so, there are tens of thousands of them. You can't follow everything, but Musk ideology follows his business interests. That had always been the case. Now, the best way to see it, of course, is what's Musk's ideology about climate change. So up until 3 years ago, the entire legitimacy of the Musk empire, Tesla empire, was this is the guy that is fighting the good fight for fighting climate change. This is why we gave him so much subsidies, more than anyone else. The credits that he got from all the auto manufacturers. They were up until 3 years ago, much of the profits of Musk came from those regulatory credits that he sold to other auto manufacturers that can continue to emit CO2. And then I think it was in August of last year, Musk invited Donald Trump to his podcast, and over Twitter, of course, Spaces, and they were discussing all sorts of policies. And then climate change came up, and Trump's answer was the usual Trump answer. Actually, climate change is great because we're going to have more oceanfront properties when sea level rises. And here you have the champion of climate change. This is the symbol. This is the poster boy of climate change, and he did not say a word. So Trump basically denying the science of climate change, and Elon is totally fine with that. And by the way, when he started to his campaign for Trump, there is no more tweets on climate change anymore. That has all disappeared. So no, the problem is not the ideology of Elon Musk. Elon changes the ideology according to his business interest forever. Now, you asked the question, the differentiation between what Barry said and what I said. What is it real? Probably is it just his wealth and power, or is it his control with X? So the answer is both. Okay, first. Having Elon Musk in government without any accountability, without confirmation in Senate, without disclosure of any conflicts of interest, basically determining which regulatory agencies are expanding and which are decimated, and all those regulatory agencies are the ones that have to regulate his own businesses. It's absurd. So you have the government and the vertically integrated of government and business into one person, something that since Andrew Mellon we didn't have, and Andrew Mellon didn't have, also didn't control the public discourse. But for our discussion today, what is really systemic in this epistemic crisis that we're facing, I think the most important part of that story is, Elon and Trump can have a fight, and then it's done. And we also see we can see some dead. But Elon is somebody that controls X, and Zuckerberg is somebody that with dual shares totally controls Meta, and the rest of the people who control social media. Those are the systemic problems that we have today in the way we organize our society. So I think that they loom much larger than the usual problem that we have with money and politics and powerful people that can, give money to our politicians.
Okay. Well, I want to go to questions now. We could, make a quick point and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is this is Guy and I. I mean, we absolutely agree, and that's the Musk's, and the thing is that there's the brute power he has, but it is his control over X and over communications and how he uses it to actually that provides the the most immediate threat. So it's like I absolutely agree with Guy on that. And then this issue about what do we do about it, and it's like we have forgotten when we talk about this is going back to the issue of what is the content of antitrust or anti-monopoly or competition policy. We keep forgetting the foundation of all democratic regulation, which is rule of law, which is non-discrimination by the state and how it applies justice to citizens, non-discrimination by the corporation and the monopoly corporation and how it carries people's voices across its platform. And this non-discrimination, and the Sherman Antitrust Act was 1890, and we keep going back to there and we stop. 3 years before the Sherman Antitrust Act was the Interstate Commerce Act. The Interstate Commerce Act at that time applied to the railroads, but it was soon blended with various regulatory attempts to impose non-discrimination on the telegraph and the telephone system. And this is actually something that Paul left out, which is, regulation back in the day wasn't simply having medium against medium. Regulation was also that within the medium, there shall not be any discrimination except by class, and all discrimination by class is to be decided by the public, not by the actor inside the corporation. So today, when we look at X, what is the first thing we can do? First thing that we do, and this is true for Facebook, it's true for Google, we apply non-discrimination. That's what every text of democracy going back 400 years teaches us. It is really very simple.
Okay.
And so that's, your answer. You ask, like, what do we do? And it is non-discrimination.
Okay. Audrey's going to make a quick point, then we'll go to Q&A.
I just wanted to bring up an additional concern, right, which is a national security aspect of Musk with his top secret clearance, and you have the U.S. government dependent on SpaceX and his technologies, right, to launch rockets, for satellite technology, right. And this is an oligarch with, say, an administration that without accountability, who has very close ties with Putin, who paired sort of Russia and Chinese government talking points, right? Who almost got a top secret Pentagon briefing on war plans, against China, right? Before Trump put a stop to it and actually said, Musk has too many business interests in China, that this doesn't make sense. And so I think, this is a very dangerous situation, right? In addition to sort of all the implications for democracy and sort of economic concentration of power, where sort of this is someone who has a massive, amount of conflicts of interest, more broadly, just in terms of thinking whether he cares about American interests, because as Guy said, his ideology is driven right by his business.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard.
Yeah, well, you drew the question out. It is unprecedented.
I knew that was just bait for you.
Historian has to dispute that, of course.
Just three quick, a lot of examples, three quick examples. The Rockefeller oil empire, picking up on Audrey, his 80% of the market was overseas. Standard Oil became standard because the British government didn't want shipments of oil in Singapore blowing up and killing hundreds of people. So he was disciplined first internationally, and then those issues having to do with differentiation of product, which was violating the anti-discrimination norms that Barry so eloquently underscored, were important in the breakup of Standard Oil in 1911. The law worked. Second, Samuel Insull, the opera house in Chicago, Insull built. huge empire, enormous media campaign, the biggest media campaign by corporations in American history, electric power, in order to discredit public power, in order to discredit regulation, failed. Public Utility Holding Company Act 1935, he ends in disgrace. And then Wendell Willkie, who's driven out of his electric power empire by, and again, electric power as a prototype for big tech today, driven out by Larry Fly, James Fly, before he goes on the FCC. He tries to get back by running for president and doesn't succeed. So there are examples of media moguls in international markets who have been constrained using, I think as Barry rightly points out, the extraordinary anti-monopoly legal resources that are embedded in American law. I know, as Barry would agree, goes back to 17th century.
Very interesting. And the Intel comparison is interesting because, of course, Musk's financials are a big question mark, and his prestidigitation between the different assets is something worth examining. Guy, you're going to say something about conflicts, and then we'll have another question.
Yeah, I want to say something about my conflict of interest, and I have a short video to illustrate it. I'd like you, with show of hands, I'm going to show you two short videos to tell me which one is real and which one is fake. This is not that. We'll start here.
This could be the biggest stock story of the year. Hi, I'm Scott Galloway. I've set up a WhatsApp investment group. Every day I'll share 3 stocks as well as the latest investment news. My goal is to help more investors. If you also want to invest with me and exchange experiences, welcome to join my WhatsApp investment group and create more profits
Galloway,
with me
very
in
famous
2025.
person, and this is, of course, my office here in Harper.
How to achieve your wealth goals in the stock market in 2025. Clarity of vision is the most valuable asset in investing today. Hi, I'm Rolnik. Right now, I'm tracking 3 high potential stocks poised for significant gains in the next 2 months. These companies are massively undervalued and are already catching the eye of institutional investors. If you wait until they hit the headlines, you'll be chasing them at much higher prices.
Okay, so which of those, show of hands, who thinks that the first one is a deep fake or fake? Okay, who thinks the second one? Okay, you're right. They are both fake. No, so I didn't want to disclose anything, but then this video actually of me pushing some snake oil investment appeared on the social media feeds of Instagram and Facebook last week when I was in DC. First, I thought it was funny, and then I started to getting more and more WhatsApp messages. After 3 days, I actually understood that every person that I have ever known, that ever, looked at my webpage, looked at my Facebook, and I don't use Facebook for years, or at my Instagram, which I don't use, or probably other places on the internet, is being exposed for me selling snake oil. Of course, now, we thought that you are a serious academic and journalist. No, you are selling snake oil on the internet. Probably thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands people were exposed to that. Now, so I reached out to Meta, and I told them that they are harming me in an unprecedented way because my entire livelihood is based on that I don't have conflict of interest. Okay, so any lawyers here in the room that can tell me what was the answer of Meta and what is the protection that I have against something like that can totally destroy my reputation? Nothing? So first of all, they told me you should report. And then they said, once you report on Instagram and on Facebook, the next time that you want to see whether actually action has been taken, you are blocked. So you can't see actually these videos anymore. And then they told me that I need to send the URLs. And then after I sent them the URLs, they told me they taken it down. And then it reappeared with vengeance, with more deep fakes and all over more and more and more. And then I started getting emails from students of mine for years, alumni students, and from readers of mine, everyone I've ever met saying, are you involved in snake oil scam? So I reached out to Meta representatives again, the lawyers, and this is what they told me. Yes, we know this is what's happening on our platform. No, you have the burden of dealing with that. At some point, they say we're looking into it, and then when they double down, the perpetrators, they wrote to me, Meta. They didn't reply for me for 3 days, and you know what? On Monday, I got a message from them. What was the message? We don't work on weekends. This is a company with net profits of close to $100 billion, number 3 in terms of its AI capabilities. And then basically they told me, no, you understand that it's totally impractical for us to monitor what's happening on our. This is from the lawyers of Meta, okay, in Israel. By the way, Herzog is also the name of the president. It's a law firm that associated with Meta in Israel. Basically, they're telling me in writing that it's impractical to stop lies on their platforms, and of course, they are enriching themselves. They make a lot of money from those scams. This is the business model. So I want to reiterate, Jesse, I don't have conflict of interest, although probably hundreds of thousands of people on Meta and Instagram thinks that I do in the last week. And
Well,
with that, I will
next
end.
year you'll have to disclose your lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a lawsuit yet because it's a question, because people
All right.
tell me, what are you going to sue them for that? For what?
One more question. I think we have time. Go behind you, David. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Michelle Ma. I'm from the Center for Research of Multinational Corporations in Amsterdam. I want to come back to Jesse's really important question on whether Musk is a monopolist, because I think it's really fundamental for this group of people to address that head on. I would argue that Musk is a monopolist. I would also argue that you could also say that President Trump is a form of monopolist. And I think that we need to think about how antitrust as a technocratic and technical discipline has tied itself up in knots for the last several decades over trying to identify whether a company is or is not a monopolist. We can see the hundreds or multiple hundreds of papers on the consumer welfare, which we can now thankfully declare as completely irrelevant for exactly that sort of trying to kind of figure out which company is or not a good or bad monopolist. So I think that we need to be unlocking the power of antitrust. And if we want to do that as a regulatory tool, then we need to be really clear that to identify a monopolist, we need to look at its power. We need to look at market power, political power. We need to look at bigness. We need to look at wealth. We need to look at property rights. We need to look at the control of the media and its conflicts of interest. It's all of the above. We don't need to argue about which one it is. If we can't look at a monopoly and actually call it a monopoly, then we won't be able to use antitrust laws. If we can't do that, then we won't be able to use the full strength of the law. And I think that comes to Barry's point about the rule of law, which is that we can go back to that old model of looking at, competition and what market behaviors do or do not promote competition. We can do that once we've removed wealth from the equation and once we've made these companies and people governable.
All right. Do you guys want to respond to that? We could have one more question. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's this issue of, I mean, as an example of just how all these things should be wound up. And this is, so we did when Musk bought Twitter, which he kind of did into sort of 2 spurts, and I guess it was May of 22, and then he kind of finished it up in November of 22. We put together a letter to various folks in the government, just urging people to at least investigate the purchase, and that we felt there was a lot of reasons to prevent the merger, and we actually listed many reasons, and in fact we ended up sending the letter simultaneously to the FCC. So Jonathan Cantor spent a long time on the phone talking to him about this. And he said, well, we do have one agency that is entirely AWOL, and that is the FCC, which was then chaired by Jessica Rosenworcel. And so he said, this really falls into Jessica's sandbox. And so the fact that we have Jessica AWLL is a problem. But we also, addressed it to Jonathan himself at the DOJ and the FTC. But we also said this is something like that particular deal, bringing together Musk's various properties, Twitter plus his existing properties, also implicated this CFIUS. It also implicated the SEC. It also implicated CFPB. It also implicated DOD. So our recommendation was, at a minimum, get sort of bring these different agencies together into a room and have a discussion about what investigations need to be had. And we did put forward one theory about like a conflict, a traditional conflict that could provide some leverage, which is the fact that we had with Starlink a regulated service, an internet service, a satellite internet service regulated under license by the FCC. And when you have a license like that gives you a lever. And you could say, well, traditionally, those who control a platform like Starlink shall not also control a platform like Twitter. So that was Mr. Brendan Carr thought that was not an acceptable theory. Europe now is actually moving in that direction, just so we know. The article that came out in the New York Times last week about sort of this pending action by Europe against X, which could lead to $1 billion fine, actually says that one of the things that Europe is doing is they're actually treating X, or treating Musk as a corporation. Because one of the arguments that was made when we sent this letter back in 2022 is Musk is not a corporation. So therefore you can't apply antitrust to him, which is an asinine, absolutely asinine argument, but it was made repeatedly, especially in the press. This is, bringing this home to all of the different tools and all the, that we have. We could have gone after this. We could have thrown sand. We had 7 different agencies that could have thrown sand into the gears. So and that's, we wouldn't have this problem, but we're not looking back. We're looking forward. So we're figuring out how we're going to throw sand into these gears going forward.
Okay.
And separate the gears from one another.
All right. On that note, I think we could spend all day just on Musk, but this has been great. I think we'll have to continue the conversation in the hallways. Thank you, Barry, Guy, and Audrey, for that. And on to the next panel.